All right, chapter 11, political parties. First of all, the chapter is going to trace the history of political parties, the evolution of political parties. If you're familiar with the musical Hamilton, cabinet battle number 1 and number 2, the Federalist versus the Jeffersonian Republicans, that was what's called the first party system. Federalist going to kind of fade away. Andrew Jackson really to the foundation and the creation of the Democratic Party, and opposition to Jackson would be amongst the Whig Party. So you had Democrats versus the Whigs. The Whig Party splits because of slavery and divisions over slavery, and then you have the formation of the Republican Party, in the 1850s. And then Abraham Lincoln is elected as Republican president in 1860. Ever since then, we've had Republican and Democrat, but we've had party realignment. So if you're wondering why Lincoln was a Republican and he is the great emancipator and freed the slaves, and then the first African-American president we had was President Obama, and he's a Democrat, and that's because of party realignment over the next 150 years. And so it goes through that. Of course, you had other third parties as well. But third parties just cannot make inroads in the two-party system. We have basically a two-party system. Their ideas will often take root and be adopted by one of the political parties or the others in order to get that support. But by and large, we've never had a third party win the presidency, for example, and it's rare that they can win a seat in Congress or a seat in the Senate, though they do from time to time, but it is extremely rare. The best that any third party has ever done is Teddy Roosevelt, and he was a former president, but even he didn't win in the 1912 election. They have the National Party and then the National Convention. So we're seeing this unfold too, because one of the things you'll look at when you're reading about this is how they select their candidates. And we have what's called a primary election and then the general election. So the primary election is when the parties choose their candidates that they want to run in the general election. The primary election is generally in March, and the general election, of course, is in November. At least that's as the presidency is concerned. Now, some other offices, sometimes the primaries are in April and May. So each party gets to pick the candidate they want. So oftentimes those are closed primaries. So for example, in Oklahoma, only Republicans can vote in the Republican primary for the candidate they want to run in the general election. What this means is because Oklahoma is really almost a one-party system now. So for example, I think 75% roughly of the state legislature is Republican. So often what that means is whoever wins the primary election, and this is true for the federal offices as well, is going to win the general election, which means if you are a Democrat or an independent in Oklahoma, you don't have that much say on who your representative is going to be, your congressman or your senator, because often it's already chosen, because whoever the Republicans pick is almost certainly going to win the general election. And you find that in more and more races across the country, leading to greater polarization, because those running, they don't have to try to get Democrats' votes because they don't need them. All they need is Republican votes, and the best way to get the Republican votes is to be more Republican or more conservative. And it works the other ways in left-leaning districts or liberal districts as well. You'll see the process play out too, because we're already, of course, the presidential race has already begun. When I'm recording this, the date is, of course, this assignment's due in early November. I saw that, so we're getting close to the end of the semester now if you're watching this then. But I recorded this back in late September, and we're getting ready for the second Republican debate. So the Republicans are choosing their nominee for president. Now, the Democrats are choosing their nominee as well, but it's Biden. They don't have significant opposition. You have Robert Kennedy Jr. is running, but he's not even really a serious candidate. So Biden's going to be the nominee. So we look at the Republican nomination, and you've got like 10 candidates. But really, as of this recording, Trump is running away from it. He's not even going to show up at the debate for the second time because he is so far ahead in the polls. But we'll see what happens, because the first caucus or primary is going to be in Iowa in January. And last time Trump actually lost in Iowa to Ted Cruz. I think that was in 2016. In 2020, he ran unopposed because he was the incumbent, and he didn't have any significant challengers in 2020. But in 2016, he lost to Ted Cruz. Just FYI, he claimed that it was fraud. He claimed that he did not lose, but Ted Cruz did win. But then Trump ran away from it, and he won New Hampshire, and then racked up other states, and people couldn't stop him, and then he ran away with it. It appears as though Trump's going to do the same thing this year. Oklahoma will vote in our primary in March. So that's called Super Tuesday, because there's a whole bunch of states that will have their primaries. So Oklahoma, if you're a Republican, you'll get to choose whether you want Trump or Ron DeSantis or Nikki Haley or any of the other 10 candidates or so. That'll happen in March. By the way, probably by March, a lot of them will have dropped out because they'll run out of money and they won't have any chance to win. So we'll see what happens between now and then, but I just want you to make aware of that. And Oklahoma will have its primary. Again, Biden is the presumptive nominee for the Democratic Party because he is the incumbent. Every now and then, the incumbent will have a serious challenger from within their own party. And if that happens, they're in trouble. They could be very weakened by that. But that hasn't happened yet with Biden. I will say in Oklahoma, the Democratic Party, they opened up their primary. They have more of an open primary. If you're a Republican, you can't vote in the Democratic Party. That could lead to sabotage. In other words, Republican could vote for the weakest Democratic candidate, and that happens in some states, in order to try to undermine their efforts. But if you are independent, the Democratic Party has said you can vote in the Democratic primary. So you do have a say on that. If you do register as independent, be aware that you won't get to vote in most primaries, because usually it's not an organized political party. What else is there with regards to political party? Your assignment this week, and I've got just a few minutes left. What we've seen with political parties is more and more about identity and less about ideology. So I shared an article with you that's really interesting from the New York Times, where it tries to identify you, based on demographics, race, religion, or ethnicity, urban, rural, to identify what you are. Now, of course, that's definitely not always accurate, not even close. There are a lot of there are people that, for example, are African American that live in rural America that are not very religious and might vote Republican. But what we've seen is that those characteristics often will indicate their political party before ideology on what they believe. And the article makes the point, and I do agree with this, that because identity has become associated with party affiliation, that has made our political environment a lot more volatile and angry. And it's a dangerous thing for sure, because we want to remember what Washington said to avoid partisan fighting, and what Jefferson said in his inaugural address. We are all Democratic Republicans. We are all Federalist. We're all Americans. But there's a lot of that information in this chapter as well. As always, it's a big chapter. And as always, email me if you have any questions. I'm here and happy to help.